Dragon Quest V is often hailed as the best JRPG of all time, and I agree. But did you know that it only sold 60,000 copies in the US and 70,000 in Europe? That's roughly the same sales as 5 Concords. And it's now, let's say, not so affordable. And Concord at least had the decency to be spoken about. But how or why did it ever get like this? If the game truly is Japan's number 2 favourite game of all time, why does it cost this much money in the West? Hello class, my name is Mr. Mason and I'm here to give you a history lesson so we can learn how to publish games worldwide. You may be asking yourself, why did the greatest JRPG of all time only sell 60,000 copies in the US and 70,000 in Europe? If you wasn't asking yourself that before, you are now. So, lesson 1, have brand consistency. Unlike in Japan, Dragon Quest had no brand recognition to lean onto. Final Fantasy had spent years mastering the Western market of JRPGs, and pre-2005, Dragon Quest was only known as Dragon Warrior. They decided to release the first 4 games, plus number 7, under the Dragon Warrior name years after the original release. Each Dragon Warrior sold fewer and fewer than the last due to an absence of marketing. Dragon Warrior 1 was included for free with a subscription of Nintendo Power magazine because it sold so low. Then when Enix closed their North America branch in 1995, the series went dormant for the next 8 years, until Dragon Quest VIII. When Square and Enix merged, they reopened their North American site and attempted to go global, with Dragon Quest Journey of the Cursed King. No 8 was actually involved in the title, also meaning that all the fans of Dragon Warrior 1, 2, 3, 4 and 7 was not aware that this new game was part of their series. However, if you're under the impression that this is just Dragon Quest, wouldn't you be confused that only a few years later you see the release of Dragon Quest again? It received the same treatment, removing the number entirely. This confusion alone is enough to deter away potential players, especially when you consider how popular Final Fantasy is instead. Lesson 2. Actually market your game. So now you know the context that Dragon Quest suffered from its branding, it's useful to know that this game was not actually marketed anywhere in the West. Square Enix ran 0 dedicated TV spots, no magazine campaign, no promotional presence of any kind. The game arrived in your local store with absolutely no announcement. They had only one marketing trick up their sleeve, which was to capitalize on Final Fantasy's popularity, which they did a few years prior. The release of Dragon Quest VIII, or Dragon Quest, it included a playable demo of the highly anticipated Final Fantasy XII. This trick was a huge success at the time, but for the release of Dragon Quest V, there was no strategy. DQ8 was a massive success with 840,000 copies sold in the West due to their tactics. They could have easily built upon this forward momentum, but instead, they killed any chances of their series taking off. The audience that DQ8 had no idea that DQ5 existed. It's not that Square Enix never tried. They tried once, and it worked. Then they just stopped trying and was surprised when it didn't work. Lesson 3. Don't do something just because one person likes it. A name you may recognize as a legend is Reggie Fils-Aimé, president of Nintendo of America from May 2006 to April 2019. He had power beyond anyone else at Nintendo and was a personal fan of Dragon Quest. Nintendo was a partnered publishing company with Square Enix, since their original business strategy was to only release the DS remakes of 4, 5 and 6 in Japan only, until Reggie stepped in and used his position and enthusiasm for the games to influence Square Enix to localize them and take it global, despite Square Enix showing very little interest. The main point here to take home: don't do something just because one person wanted it. There was no actual business strategy to the Western releases other than Reggie really wanted it. It sort of happened accidentally and nobody took responsibility. A few years later, Nintendo took the reins in promoting Dragon Quest IX with a proper campaign. It even had huge stars like Dylan and Cole Sprouse to promote the game to connect with kids, and even Seth Green to appear in 2 TV ads.
If you go anywhere, where would you go? I reckon I'd go... the Batcave? I was there yesterday. Stornoway? Is that in Scotland? Brigadoon? No, John, there's too many monsters there. Ah, get out of here!
It was so successful and was actually the first real success of Dragon Quest in the West. But what did Dragon Quest V have? Well, the answer might actually shock you. They had huge stars and big names promoting the games. People like, oh, and don't forget that one guy, Lesson 4. Cater to your markets. As we've discussed about the poor brand recognition of Dragon Quest in the West, it's not quite the same in Japan. In fact, it's considered the national RPG that rivals the cultural significance of even Pokemon. Can you imagine walking down to your local shop and it has Dragon Quest plastered all over the walls? So much of Japanese culture is rooted directly or indirectly to Dragon Quest, and by the time DQ5 DS Remake was released in Japan, it had 22 years of nostalgic connection since the original. But that nostalgic connection was stronger than you'd think. Originally, Dragon Quest released alongside Dragon Ball, and I don't know if you've heard of it, it's not very big. And it did have the same viewership, the same magazine spots, the same generation of kids feeding into both series. And since Toriyama designed both, the audiences were essentially the same people. However, that pipeline never existed in the West. Dragon Ball didn't arrive until the 90s, and that connection would be missed since Dragon Warrior changed the art completely out of fear of being too childish. They felt the art needed to replicate the medieval vibe, a traditional knights vs dragons storybook sort of look, and replacing all the whimsy in its dialogue in favour of Elizabethan English. This was for every release for 15 whole years, meaning that emotional attachment was never there, and when you take into consideration the Dragon Warrior fanbase didn't even recognise Dragon Quest, Square Enix keeps digging their grave deeper and deeper. In Japan, Square Enix can silently drop a game with no marketing and still have it sell due to reputation and pure love. The West had neither of this. In conclusion, you can't market to a nostalgia that doesn't exist. Lesson 5. Think ahead. One bad launch can haunt you for a decade, or in this case, 3 bad launches. The previous year, Dragon Quest Chapters of the Chosen was released on the DS. This was the 4th game, but they stripped away the number again. It only got around 260,000 sales, and this should have been a warning sign for Square Enix to either stop or start paying attention. However, they continued to do nothing despite having an entire year to evaluate their plans for Dragon Quest V, and 1 year later, Square Enix went insane. They tried the same thing again and expected better results, which only got worse and worse. Dragon Quest IV was the warning sign. 260,000 sales isn't inherently bad, but action needs to be taken. Dragon Quest V split that in half, with 130,000 sales, and should have been the time to say, okay guys, we fucked up, how do we fix this? But then 1 year later, the nail in the coffin was Dragon Quest VI, with only around 50,000 copies sold. The precise figures are unknown. They were so embarrassingly low, I expect they stopped counting. Dragon Quest VIII proved that there was an audience in the West. However, this entire Zenithian trilogy killed any momentum it had. The destructive sales entirely ruined any reputation they could have got, and I would say it is entirely to blame for why Dragon Quest isn't being picked up until now, from 2023 onwards with the HD 2D remakes. DQ4 sold badly, so Square Enix stopped trying. Because Square Enix stopped trying, DQ5 sold worse. Because DQ5 sold worse, Square Enix basically gave up any chances with DQ6, which then became the worst selling Western console release of Dragon Quest and Dragon Warrior in history, which was a huge disappointment from the 840,000 sales of DQ8 just a few years prior. This had affected the brand for over a decade. Lesson 6. If nobody is responsible, everyone is responsible. If you think about Lesson 5 for a moment, who actually took responsibility for this failure? It wasn't Square Enix. They didn't plan to localize it in the first place. And it wasn't Nintendo. They didn't have any marketing strategy or any other plan than Reggie saying, hey guys, we should drop this in America. Come on, all the cool kids are doing it. but nobody took responsibility to market these games, so when it ultimately failed, fingers were pointing to no one, and in the end, settled on just forgetting about it. Like I mentioned earlier in Lesson 3, Dragon Quest IX was a massive success. This time it's because Nintendo did take the reins and refused to repeat the same mistakes they did with the Zenithian trilogy. This initiative led to over 1 million Western sales, proving once again that there is a beloved market there. And with hindsight, you can see how easy it would have been. However, I truly believe Square Enix may have seen this as a temporary blip. The inconsistency in sales over 5 games spoke louder than the actual market, and in my opinion, the reason Dragon Quest X never got a release in the West, even in 2026, and I think it all traces back to Dragon Quest IV, V, and VI. That failure affected the series in ways Square Enix could never imagine. The Super Famicom version released September 17, 1992 at around 9,000 yen, equivalent to 60 to 70 US dollars now. Except as most games do, its worth decreases significantly over 34 years. eBay listings now sat around £25 to £40 second hand depending on its condition. I got my copy for 16 with all of these extras in good quality. I got a steal. The PS2 version did have a wider release on a more accessible console, however it's still region locked to Japanese PS2 consoles. Originally priced at the typical standard for PS2 games, roughly 8,400 yen, worth around 111 US dollars today. And now you can buy the game for around 15 to 30 depending on its condition. The DS copy was sold in Japan at roughly 5,600 yen, around $74 now. But at the time it released in North America at $39.99 and £29.99 in Europe. And due to everything we've discussed in this video, a copy of Dragon Quest Hand of the Heavenly Bride is sitting on eBay for between £150 to £300 plus depending on condition, region and being sealed. I believe that the price has risen so high due to the demand for this game compared to the other 2 Zenithian trilogy remakes. Dragon Quest V is often hailed as the best JRPG ever, and this title alone is enough for the demand to skyrocket. And let's not forget how physical media spiked during the COVID lockdown years. It's another factor to why these games are so expensive now. But being the only official English version of the game with limited copies in circulation, it's out of reach for nearly all fans. It's worth mentioning that there is the mobile version, which is just a port of the DS version. However, playing on mobile is just nowhere near the same. Playing on a screen feels off compared to the DS or a controller. I played the PS2 version recently using a third-party PS2 controller and an Xbox 360 controller, and it felt so much better than when I emulated the DS version on my phone. If you love Dragon Quest just like I do, consider dropping a like and subscribe for more Dragon Quest content. And if you do want to experience Dragon Quest V without spending £300, I did make a cinematic retelling of the entire story right here. I think you'll like it.